Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer. Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show. I'm super excited to have Dr. Alex Carrasco on today's show with us today. Hi, Alex.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Honestly, I get so many questions about microbiome and the gut, and I'm like, I don't know. So I'm finally able to give people the answers that they've been searching, and that's why we're going to talk about fertility and your gut with an expert. So thank you for being on today's show.
Oh, thanks.
So before we get started, I just want to do a brief intro all about you and read your bio. So Dr. Alejandra Carrasco is board certified in both family medicine and integrative and holistic medicine. She's a certified practitioner by the Institute of Functional Medicine and has spent the last decade studying nutrition, integrative, preventative, and functional medicine. Wow. During medical school, she trained with Dr. Andrew Weil. Did I pronounce his name right?
Weil.
I have Abazadeh. People butcher that all the time.
Yeah, Alejandra, very hard. Yeah, I get it.
At the University of Arizona program of integrative medicine and in New York at Beth Israel's Continuum Center for Health and Healing. And in 2008, she did research with MD Anderson's Integrative Medicine Center, focusing on nutritional interventions in cancer therapy, namely omega-3 fatty acids and medicinal mushrooms. Oh, you have to tell us about that. She's married to another doctor, a local dermatologist, and they have 3 children. And outside of medicine, she loves to garden and read. So you're a busy mom, and you're more than that. So just share with us about your blog, your book, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess when I started medical school, I already had a bit of an interest in beyond, in indigenous wellness and in my own Latino upbringing. There was just a lot of kind of folk medicine that was passed down. And so I had a lot of interest in herbal medicine and in other types of healing that already existed. But when I was in medical school, halfway through, I suddenly developed panic attacks and fainting episodes and irritable bowel syndrome. It was very scary. And I had a great, medical team that did amazing, probably $1 million workups just to find that nothing was wrong and that I was probably just stressed. And, they said, well, maybe you just need to go on anti-anxiety medicine and IBS medicine. And I'd also developed migraines and migraine medicine and, go on your merry way. But I just felt like there was more to explore, but no one could give me answers. So that really piqued my interest in what's happening in the gut, what's happening in the body, what are triggering these things in people, and is it really enough to just say, well, here are medications that you can just take forever for these lifelong issues, and then go on your merry way. So that's kind of what started me, asking all these questions. And I studied. I took a year off between medical school and residency, and I found functional medicine during that time. I went to just a CME course. And it was all about food as medicine. And I learned about functional medicine during that experience. And it blew my mind because here were physicians that were presenting studies about, food sensitivities and inflammatory markers and that the role in the gut and in migraines and food and the gut. And I just was like, how is this possible that I didn't learn any of this in medical school? Like nothing. And so I said, I have to learn what this is about. And it really changed my life. I threw myself into that study the year that I was in between my medical school and residency. And then I went to residency and I did family medicine. I always have been passionate about, all ages and wanting to take care of, know about children, but also, had the beautiful experience of learning how to deliver babies and also taking care of adults and elderly. So I love the breadth of knowledge that I gained from that. But I just felt like I wanted better outcomes for folks and what I was seeing. And then in residency, I got pregnant with my first child. And as I'm sure as happens with many healthcare providers, working 80 hours a week, taking call Q3, Q4, I had a terrible case of preeclampsia at the end of my pregnancy. I was actually on call developed it on call. I had to leave to go to another hospital, and I was bedbound for a couple weeks, and then I was induced 22 days early, and thank God my daughter was healthy. But I had a postpartum hemorrhage, and then I had to have a blood transfusion, and then I had a transfusion reaction. And so after that experience, I got really passionate about preconception health, pregnancy health, postpartum health. And I think that everything, that I experienced kind of just drove me to wanting to help people have not just kind of status quo outcomes. I want exceptional outcomes. I wanted better outcomes. I wanted better for myself and better for my patients and better for women. And so I started a practice in 2012, kind of pooling together all of the information that I had studied over the years with an integrative medicine and functional medicine approach. And then in 2017, I wrote a book because I felt like I wanted to have a roadmap available for people that couldn't come and see me, that kind of laid out for them the way in which I see health and the way in which I try to help people cultivate health. So that is basically me in a nutshell.
I love it. And what's the name of your book?
My book is called Bloom, and it's 7 Steps to Reclaim Your Health, Cultivate Your Desires, and Reignite Your Spark.
Awesome. And you also have a podcast.
I do. So the other thing that happened is after I had my third child, my best friend and I, who's also a functional medicine physician, we started a company called Hey Mommy, because we wanted to support women through the whole motherhood experience, from preconception all the way through motherhood, because we were seeing, people through the whole spectrum in our practices, and just wanted to have a resource for people that wanted maybe a more holistic experience, more nutritionally guided experience. And we wanted to be a bridge between two worlds. We're very proud to be allopathic, physicians trained in medicine, but also feel like there is space for more holistically minded therapies. And so we kind of created that. We're kind of standing in that bridge space.
I love it. Okay. So
thank
tell
you.
us about gut health. What is it for someone who has no idea what it means?
Right. And it's very, I guess I would say gut health is a very buzzy topic right now. But, basically, so let's just kind of start with the fundamentals. So in the fundamentals are that we all have a microbiome. And our microbiome is basically all the bacteria that live on and inside of our bodies. And in the digestive system alone, there are over 100 trillion bacteria that live within us. So we've barely just kind of started researching and understanding just the kind of tip of the iceberg as far as microbiome goes. And not only is it bacteria, it's viruses, it's fungi, it's protozoa that live within us. And it's the interaction of these things within our body that then can either drive health or it can drive disease. And so we know, for example, that microbiome plays a big role in chronic illness and developing allergies and mood, many other things. And I guess if you were thinking about whether or not you had gut issues, a lot of times people come in complaining about having gas or being bloated or having constipation or having diarrhea or swinging between the two. We know that there's an interaction between the microbiome and weight gain or obesity. We know that there's an interaction between the microbiome and energy levels, risk of autoimmune disease, immune system function. Chronic skin diseases can be a reflection of microbiome status, and inflammatory diseases as well. And so it ends up being kind of this, I guess it can feel a little bit like a rabbit hole. But taking care of gut health is so important because it really is the seat of health. It's a foundational aspect of how interactions and inflammatory reactions happen in our body.
So for someone who's listening to us right now, how would they know if they have poor gut health and should get help with this problem?
Well, I think, probably the main symptoms that I see are that they get, super bloated after they eat, or they struggle with constipation, they struggle with diarrhea, they feel like they can't make it to the bathroom in time. Constant gas, even reflux can be a symptom. And then there are other issues that people can have that are not necessarily GI related, but sometimes some of the kind of more malaise-like symptoms of fatigue, headache, skin rashes can also be a reflection of what's happening in the microbiome of the gut.
And then how about its effect on fertility? Is there any evidence that they're connected?
You know, I wouldn't say that there's an exact correlation, but we know that there can be an issue between the gut microbiome and inflammation. And we know that sometimes infertility can be caused by inflammatory processes. So in my perspective, the more that we can do to decrease inflammation within a patient, the higher likely, like the less that they have to, fight that issue, and then their resources can go more, and their body's resources can go towards fertility.
Mm-hmm. And what about getting pregnant and having a healthy pregnancy? I mean, you mentioned your own story with preeclampsia.
Yes.
Why would it be important to address gut health before pregnancy and even in pregnancy?
That's a great question. So we know that the microbiome can play a role, or gut health can play a role in pregnancy outcomes. We know that there's an increased risk of preterm birth when there are excesses of dysbiosis or bad kinds of bacteria. We know that there's an increased risk of preeclampsia. We also know there's an increased risk of gestational diabetes. And we also know that there's an increased risk of weight gain during pregnancy. And all of this can be related to microbiome effects. And so, my stance has always been that if we can build the microbiome up in the preconception period, you have a much better, chance of having an outcome that's positive throughout pregnancy. The other thing is that basically when you have a baby through the vaginal canal, you give birth vaginally, your baby is basically swallowing your microbiome. And so you're seeding your baby's gut through vaginal birth. And if you have dysbiosis, if you've got an overgrowth of pathogens, if you have this kind of skewed system, then your baby is also going to acquire that. So for multiple reasons, I think it's really important to build up the microbiome as much as possible in a healthy way before pregnancy. Now, there's definitely things that happen like that you can't control. Like some people have group B strep infections, and that has to be treated before you deliver. Some people have to have a C-section. And, that can be distressing to people, especially because then, your baby's not necessarily getting that microbiome.
And you mentioned this word for people who don't know what microbiome actually means. What is it?
It's basically the trillions of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and protozoa that live within the gut. They also live on our skin, but we talk about it mainly as the kind of the whole symphony of creatures that live within us.
Right. And then how can you restore gut health for someone who is not necessarily trying to get pregnant, for someone who is trying to get pregnant, and for someone who is already pregnant?
Right. So I would say that probably nutritional approaches are the best ways to kind of do this. So number one, I would say you want to eat probiotic rich foods. So things like sauerkraut or yogurt, kimchi, lacto-fermented vegetables beyond sauerkraut. You can also do this at home, make this at home. And then, one thing that I want to mention, and I'll add more to my list in a moment, but I think this is kind of a hypothesis that I have. When I think about my grandparents' generation, my grandmother lived to be 103 years old and never, exercised quote unquote a day in her life. Her generation, in my experience, didn't think about health in the way that we do. But there were so many traditional foods that were eaten culturally in her time. And I think that we've lost these old methods of cooking because we live this very fast-paced life. And so, for example, with fermented foods, that was a staple of many, many cultural diets. And so the other thing that a lot of people also consumed, kind of in the olden days, were a lot of gelatin-rich broths, which are very, very good for the gut mucosa. So I really believe that there might be a correlation between this incidence of increased gut issues with this change of traditional foods that we just don't consume anymore. So back to eating cultured foods, I think that that's a very easy thing that we can do. I think also eating prebiotic-rich foods, things like onions and leeks and garlic and jicama, dandelion greens. These are foods that have fibers that can act as a food source for probiotic bacteria, for the healthy bacteria in the gut. You can also eat foods that are fiber rich and that have resistant starch. And so these are things like beans and nuts and seeds and whole grains. And then there are foods like potatoes or cold yuca, which have resistant starch, or green bananas. And they also feed the friendly bacteria in your gut. Another, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I
No,
was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
so it's a lot more than just take a probiotic.
Yeah, I think taking a probiotic is great. It's like great insurance, right? But there's so many other things that we can do, because taking a probiotic will be useful, but you also have to feed those healthy bacteria in the gut. And then the other thing is supporting a healthy stress response, because we know that high levels of chronic stress, for example, if you're going through infertility treatments, release inflammatory stress hormones and chemicals such as, norepinephrine and cortisol and cytokines. And those can, play a role in upregulating inflammation. And we know that when cortisol is high, that also plays a role in the microbiome. And, we can get increased expression of kind of a pathogenic or dysbiotic bacteria. And then I would also say that finally, avoiding antibiotics as much as possible. There is 100% a role for antibiotics, absolutely useful, if you need them. But a lot of times, people will take them gratuitously. And so I would say that just, being very mindful and cautious of, is it truly something that needs to be done? And that's an important conversation to have with your physician.
Yeah.
And then I think taking a high quality probiotic, it's like very good insurance, but it's not just that one thing, in my experience and in my opinion.
And patients ask me all the time, what brand do you recommend? Is there a particular brand that you recommend for your patients?
There's many different ones. I really like the Orthobiotic brand. Orthomolecular is the brand, but the Orthobiotic probiotic is really, it has lactobacillus, it has bifidobacteria, and we know that those two strains of probiotics are very important just for longevity, but also we know they're very important for vaginal health, and then we also know they're very important for baby health. So that's my go-to.
Mm-hmm. And what about during pregnancy as well? Are these the same probiotics that a pregnant woman could take?
I think so. I mean, there's controversy with probiotics during pregnancy, and I think that's a conversation that every patient needs to have with their OB. But yes, I mean, they're generally well tolerated as long as you have a healthy immune system. But I think really trying to have as much of a diverse diet as well, so that you can feed those good guys.
Mm-hmm. And then what testing do you do on your patients to study their gut health to see if there's improvement over time? Are there tests like that are available?
Yeah, there are tests. There are tests that there's different kinds of testing. There's testing that looks at the DNA, the stool study that looks at the DNA within the gut and kind of gives you a broad idea of what is overgrown, what pathogens exist. There's also stool cultures. There's also ova and parasite testing that can be done with microscopy. So it really depends on the patient. There's also testing that can look at if there's an overgrowth of yeast, and there's also testing that can look at if there's SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on symptomatology, and then but yes, it can be assessed and it can be tracked and followed over time.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that you're talking about an area of health that a lot haven't even thought about. So for patients who don't live in your state, would they still be able to benefit from your expertise?
Well, they can read my book, and I have a great chapter in there about the gut. And then, I'm just practicing in Texas. But if you go to the Institute of Functional Medicine website, you can find doctors within your state that are practicing functional medicine or that are licensed in your state. Mm-hmm. But I think that there are things that everyone can do that don't necessarily require, working with an expert. I think that they're very basic things, and like many of the things that we discussed today. And also I have a lot of that outlined in my book as well.
I love it. And the name of your book again?
It's called Bloom. And if you can look it up on Amazon in my name, and feel free to download it or to get it.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to include a link that will go with this show. So what's the most important thing you'd want someone to know about their gut health who's trying to conceive right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's what I think. I think that the more that you can do before you get pregnant to support your gut health, the likely, you're setting yourself up for success. There's many things that we can't control in a pregnancy, but I think that building up your microbiome beforehand, like it just sets the stage for like a very healthy gut, so that then your baby, if you hopefully have a vaginal birth, or even if you have a C-section birth, your baby can get your gut microbiome and also benefit from that work that you've done. So I really believe in building up the gut before pregnancy, and I didn't even think about that when I was I was already a doctor and a resident. No, I didn't even think about it once. It wasn't until after my very crazy experience and got me researching and really reading that I realized how important it was to do that. And it made all the difference, in my opinion, from my second and third pregnancies. And I've seen it, time and time again in my practice as well.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you, Alex, for coming on. I really appreciate all the information you shared with us. You guys have to get her book, Bloom. Go to her website, nourishmedicine.com. Follow her on Instagram. Thank you again. And I hope you're welcome. And I hope you'll come on and do a live Q&A soon with us. I bet people will have a lot to ask you live.
That would be fun.
So please come back. Okay. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show, a program exclusively designed to promote reproductive health awareness and discuss fertility preservation options. Here is your host, the Harvard-educated fertility specialist, Dr. Amy.
She's known as the Egg Whisperer. Fertility expert Dr. Amy Abazadeh.
And you have yet another success story
Just launched by an East Bay fertility doctor.